Good morning, everybody. We are so glad to have you here. My name is Jennifer Weiss-Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center. We are so pleased to welcome you this morning to our annual symposium, Reconstructing the Reconstruction Amendments. For those of you who are new to the BWLC, as we're called, by way of quick introduction, we are the only of NYU's 38 centers here at the law school that is focused on women's leadership and the role of women in public life and the law. We are honored to be joined today by two fellow centers here in sponsoring this event, the Center for Race, Inequality, and the Law, and the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Among the ways the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center advances its mission, we provide leadership training to law students. We serve as a hub for thought leadership on gender equity issues by holding public discussions and symposia like this. And we contribute our expertise to advocacy, educational and media initiatives broadly that advance gender justice. I am certain you all know quite well our faculty director, Professor Melissa Murray, who will be on stage later this morning. And I would like to give extra thanks this morning to our staff, Shirley Dang, Claire Whitman, and Sherry Arnold. We are also very deeply grateful to Deckert, which is sponsoring our symposium. This is the inaugural Deckert Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center Symposium, and we're really, really grateful for your support and your presence here this morning. And I would like to give really huge gratitude and thanks to the person who really is responsible for the entire spirit and theme of our convening this morning, Professor Kim Mutcherson, who is a visiting scholar in residence here at the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center, spending her sabbatical year after serving as co-dean of Rutgers Law in Camden. We just couldn't be more grateful to have you in our presence this year, every day, and especially today. She will be speaking in a moment more about the vision and scholarship of NYU Law's brilliant and beloved Professor Peggy Cooper Davis. So with that, I would love to turn the mic over to Kim, and thank you again so much for being here this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I am incredibly grateful to see all of you in the room here today for what I expect will be a difficult but ultimately uplifting series of conversations. We'll see, one can hope. In the spirit of giving credit where credit is due, though, I want to make clear that this symposium was not actually my brainchild, though once the idea got planted, I got obsessed with it and made sure that it came to pass. The credit for the inspiration for doing an event that celebrates the work of Professor Peggy Cooper Davis actually goes to Melissa Murray, with whom I shared a very long car ride over a year ago from an event at Penn State Dickinson, which if you've ever been there, it's a long car ride. And we started talking in the back of the car, having this really wide-ranging conversation, and talking about doing an event about the Roberts Court and sort of what they've been doing. And then she suggested, what if we use that as a way to celebrate the work of Peggy Davis? And I was like, you're a rock star, that's fabulous, and we're gonna make that happen. So that is why we are here today. So here we all are preparing to have a conversation about the stories we tell about this country's history and how and why those stories are so crucial to the rights that the Supreme Court recognizes and protects, or in many cases, does not recognize and does not protect. It seems particularly apt, if a bit strange, that we're having this conversation when there are literally people who believe, or maybe are just threatening, that we are on the brink of a new civil war. Given that we haven't finished the project that emerged from the first Civil War, building a country that lives up to its professed ideals, having a second civil war at this point seems premature at best. But so much about the legal and political landscape in which we now find ourselves is hard to understand, so frankly, preparing for a civil war just seems like par for the course. Now, for those who don't know Professor Davis, I want to start the day by situating her role in the legal academy. She began her academic career at NYU Law in 1983. She had been at Rutgers Law in Newark before that. And you'll not be surprised to learn at the time that she was one of a very small number of Black women law professors, not just at NYU, not just in New York, in the country. She came to NYU having done critical work in the public interest as an attorney working for legal services organizations, an associate counsel for the Capital Punishment Project at the NAACP LDF, and as a family court judge, among other roles. What this means is that she came to the Academy with significant experience as a real-life lawyer who was keenly aware of the ways in which race and other socioeconomic factors operate in our legal system, and in particular, with deep personal knowledge of how our family court system operates to the detriment of so many low-income families of color. Her experiences infused both her teaching and her scholarship. As a family law professor, she taught family law not as an area of law that simply mediated divorces between the wealthy, but as a system that fundamentally, and in far too many cases, irrevocably shattered families of color, an issue that will certainly come up in our conversations today. Her work on family law and the Constitution, embodied in her book, Neglected Stories, is as relevant today as it was when first published in 1997. In that book, which you all should read if you haven't done so already, Professor Davis writes powerfully and persuasively about the motivating stories of enslaved people that shaped the Reconstruction Amendments and the doctrinal stories that courts created about these same amendments. You won't be surprised to hear that these stories didn't always fit together seamlessly. Our discussions today will take their cue from neglected stories, from the neglected stories that Professor Davis unearthed and collected in her work. So today's symposium is fundamentally about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we ignore, and the stories that we reframe to fit into our own narratives. It is about how the process of ending slavery and rebuilding a post-Civil War America is a history that has been through its own periods of transformation and reconciliation by historians of the era. It is about how learning about and taking seriously the neglected stories of enslaved people is necessary to a fulsome understanding of the Reconstruction Amendments. As Professor Davis explained in her book, quote, "All legal doctrines are stories structured upon formal but ambiguous texts and nourished by history and culture," end quote. Her work is a powerful reminder of the very simple words that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson used in her dissent in SFFA. She wrote, quote, "History speaks. In some form, it can be heard forever. The race-based gaps that first developed centuries ago are echoes from the past that still exist today," end quote. So we're gonna allow history to speak today. We're gonna try to deconstruct how the Roberts Court understands and abuses history, and more important, how those of us who care about the Constitution and this country as a primary text for civil rights, can we find ways to get us back on track? We have an absolutely stellar lineup of speakers today, academics, activists, and really some of my favorite people, academic activists. And I'm excited for you to hear from all of them. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce Tamara Matheson-Hultgren, who is a BWLC fellow, a research assistant to Professor Davis, and a member of the JD class of 2024. She's in her last semester, friends. Tamara?
Thank you all for being here. As mentioned, I'm a BWLC fellow, and I'm so proud to be part of the center and today's programming. I've had the pleasure of being Professor Davis's research assistant since the summer after my 1L year, researching resistance movements to slavery. Working for her has encouraged me to think expansively about what legal scholarship can be. She's always encouraged me to work bravely, and her guidance has made me a better researcher and a more creative lawyer. So I'm so grateful to be part of this celebration of her work. I also want to share some important details about today's agenda. We are recording today's event, but we're not live streaming, so please check the BWLC website for that, where that video will be posted. New York State CLE credit is available, but you must sign in and out to receive it, so please stop by the front desk if you haven't done so already. Each panel, including our lunchtime keynote with Professor Melissa Murray and Leadership Conference President Maya Wiley, will include time for questions from the audience. We will let you know when it's time to line up for the standing microphones. Please keep your questions concise and state your name and affiliation when you speak. We have built-in bio breaks and a bit of time for mingling between each panel, so please stay on after we close to socialize and get to know one another. And with that, thank you again for being here, and we're going to kick it off with our opening panel, the Roberts Court and the Reconstruction Amendments, How Did We Get Here?